During his time in office, he has led Nashville through two big challenges, a deep national recession and a 1,000-year flood, and has still made progress on the priorities of education, public safety, and economic development. Since taking office, his efforts have led to over 1,500 new jobs being created in Davidson County, representing private investments totaling almost $80 million. In the spring of 2008, he formed the Green Ribbon Committee on Environmental Sustainability and set a goal to make Nashville the greenest city of the Southeast. And I think that is so great that we're at the point now where cities may actually be competing for those titles. That is a true evolution of where we've been. So and as part of this, he is developing the first comprehensive open space plan for Davidson County, which is the focus of his talk today. And Mayor, we really appreciate your leadership and welcome you to the first National Green Infrastructure Conference.
Thank you. It's great to be with you all. I'm a lawyer and taught as an adjunct at Vanderbilt for many years, and this is, I would love to have taught in a room like this. This is the most, one of the most beautiful rooms I've been in for this type of function. This is wonderful. I have been mayor now for 3.5 years, and I can tell you that it is a real honor to hold this job. I go to work, I tell people every day, 100% of the time, I go to work happy. And I stay happy usually till around 10:30 a.m. But it's a good job because you get to work on real issues that you can actually affect. And in a city like Nashville, which I think has such a wonderful future, you feel it's a very meaningful role, and I'm very proud to serve as mayor. I'm not a Nashville native. I'm actually the third consecutive mayor who came to Nashville after getting out of school. We like to say we got there as fast as we could when we figured out where we wanted to be. I grew up in a small town in north central Massachusetts and went to college in New York and thought that I would go to law school and spend the rest of my life in New England. And so I wanted to see a different part of the country. And so I went down to Vanderbilt in Nashville. And so I get to Nashville in 1978 and enroll in law school. And you know the story, I meet a woman in law school, and she's a Nashville native, lot smarter than me, and she's still teaching at Vanderbilt. And we fall in love, and we go through this, this process. Like the diplomats say, we had frank and open discussions about where we'd live after we got married. I was advocating for small-town industrial New England, and she was advocating for dynamic Nashville. And I live in Nashville. That was the first of many failures on my part as an advocate. But it is an absolutely wonderful city in which to live. It's a diverse city, and it is often considered to be the friendliest city in the United States, and I think it is. People there are just are very open, and I think as witnessed by the fact that you've had mayors now, 2 from Massachusetts and 1 from Pennsylvania over the last 20 years. I am honored to be invited here today to speak about what's going on in Nashville. We've been working on an open space plan where we've worked in partnership with the Land Trust for Tennessee and the Conservation Fund to come up with the plan. This plan has represented sort of a unique public-private partnership. We brought in the Land Trust, we brought in the Conservation Fund, and then we received funding, the city did, to help pay for this from the Martin Foundation, which is a local foundation in Nashville. I'll get to some of the highlights of the plan in a moment, but I think it is nearly impossible to talk about open space or to talk about the city of Nashville at this point without talking about the flood that occurred in Nashville in May of last year. On May 1st and May 2nd, we had a huge rainfall, which resulted in probably the worst natural disaster our city has experienced in easily 75 years or so. Yesterday, I was in North Carolina basically speaking on the same topic, and I was getting email from the Office of Emergency Management, which is part of the mayor's office, saying that we were anticipating to get 2 to 3 inches of rain today. And that was the same message I had received the day before the flood when we got 13.5 inches. I'm happy to report that about 20 minutes ago, I got a message saying that the weather risk in terms of flooding has been reduced to only a moderate risk, and they're expecting much less rain. So I can relax a little bit about that. When I think about the flood, I think about really how it began. And how it began for me is I go back to Thursday, April 29th in 2010. And this is obviously a picture of me at Riverfront Park in Nashville. And Riverfront Park is exactly what it sounds like. It is the park on our river downtown. And it is an area where we often have the CMA Music Fest, other concerts and things, public gatherings take place. According to the Metro Charter, which is the constitution of our city, the mayor is to give a State of Metro speech each year. And that speech usually comes about the time the budget is due. The budget's due on May 1st. And the speech is where the mayor gives his or her vision of where the city's going and where we are right now. So I gave my speech on April 29th on a beautiful morning, spring morning in Tennessee, sun's out, right on the riverfront. Allison Krauss did the music for the event. And in my speech, I talked about the things you would expect me to talk about. I talked about, what a positive city Nashville was, that we had done a lot of big things recently. We had done a lot of work with education reform. We were doing a lot of work with the environment. Our police force was fully staffed for the first time in 5 years. Crime has continued to go down. I talked about the challenges of the recession that, we certainly were not immune from. I talked about our economy, that, we are basically the healthcare capital of America. We have about 250 healthcare companies in Nashville. That is our #1 private employer. Talked about the music industry, talked about our great universities, and talked about our challenges. But I ended the speech with, if I had to describe in one word what my feelings are about Nashville right now, that word would be optimistic. And that was on April 29th. Go forward now to Saturday. Saturday, May 1st, I get up, go about my normal Saturday deals, which is usually going to a couple public events. I went out early Saturday morning to Cheekwood, which is Cheekwood Botanical Gardens and Art Gallery, is one of our great cultural assets, and it was their 50th anniversary. And they wanted me to cut a ribbon to celebrate that. So I went out there, and it was pouring down rain. And they still wanted to do it outside, and so it was me, a few staff people from Cheekwood, one television camera, and I cut a ribbon. And we kind of joked about this was kind of a goofy way to begin the day, cutting a ribbon in the rain with no one watching. And I went about my business, went to work, and I came home around noon, and I got a phone call from the deputy mayor saying, this 2 to 3 inches is going to be more than that. You need to come up to the emergency management office, which is up on a hill, and it's where all the 911, all the telecommunications, is where the police, fire, emergency medical, everybody gathers there in a crisis. So I went up there, and we had clearly a situation that was different than what we expected. Over the course of that weekend, 48 hours, we had 14 inches of rain. And this is a picture of I-24, which is, Nashville has 3 interstates that go through it. I-24 basically goes from Chattanooga up to St. Louis. This is what happened on I-24. And what happened early, what was going on Saturday was the tributaries and creeks of the Cumberland River were beginning to flood, flash flooding. The Cumberland goes right through the middle of the city, and the tributaries are all throughout the city. And so this is really the result, not of the Cumberland River flooding, but of the tributaries and the amount of the rainfall. So we had to make some really quick initial decisions. The first thing I was confronted with was of great import, was that scheduled that night at the Bridgestone Arena in downtown Nashville was a Jimmy Buffett concert. Most importantly, I had tickets, and I had never been, and my wife was a huge Jimmy Buffett fan. She's been, and so, but we began, we started seeing these things happening in different sectors of our city that we had to make some decisions. And I thought maybe we needed to call off the concert just to tell people don't come downtown, everybody just stay home, which was the message we were sending out to the public at this point. So I called down to Bridgestone Arena to talk to the police and everybody who's down there to figure out where we are. This is late in the afternoon on Saturday. And not being a parrot head, not really knowing how these concerts work, I learned something. Jimmy Buffett concerts are kind of like, like football games. People go and prepare themselves for the concerts. I mean, there's a ritual where you just get ready, and you have to drink a lot to get ready, apparently. And so when I called down there and said, what should we do? They said, well, it doesn't really matter what you do. There's going to be a concert here, and everybody is ready. So so I went down with the police chief and said, everybody behave, drive safely, stay in town if you can. And the concert went on. There was no problems there. We also had to make decisions about whether we were going to do a curfew. I started getting all these calls from people suggesting, do a curfew, do a curfew, do a curfew. And I stopped, that would be kind of fun. I've never done that, to say, go, everybody stay home tonight. But my sense of it was that there was nothing going, everybody was behaving. There was no looting, there was no rioting, there was no lawlessness. People were just getting wet. And to declare a curfew would be just elevating this sense of emergency or the sense of crisis that didn't exist. And the people who were out were trying to help. And so we did not declare a curfew at any point during this entire situation. And I think it was the right decision, although I kept getting people telling me I should do that. All right, this is on Monday. This is the Cumberland River. This is Riverfront Park. Those two buildings, that's exactly where I gave the State of Metro address. So all of that is underwater. You see that's historic First Avenue. Quite a difference in a period of days from when the State of Metro speech was given. This is downtown. This is our beautiful Symphony Hall, which is a relatively new building. It's maybe 4 or 5 years old. It is, probably it's a type of building that no one builds anymore. We had a major benefactor, the Martha Ingram, who lives in Nashville, made a huge contribution to have this built in Nashville. Our symphony just won 3 Grammys. We keep track of that in Nashville, how many Grammys you win. So this building, which is was built to last for 300 years, and it just opened a few years before. And what happened was it wasn't the Cumberland overflowing, it was the water coming from beneath, because the whole system was just so overloaded. And the water came up from underneath the building with such force that it buckled the floor. And destroying organs, the beautiful organ they had there and everything else. And this building was the last of the major buildings downtown to reopen. It reopened on New Year's Eve. Itzhak Perlman played, and it's totally back up and running, and it's still a beautiful building. And one of the buildings next to it, you can't really see in this picture, the Country Music Hall of Fame, was flooded in an auditorium, a little not quite as nice as this, but in an auditorium, and they were able to get open within 10 days. Because one of the big things that was going on for the city at this point was, if you go back to May 1st and May 2nd of last year, and you recall that was the weekend of the Times Square bomber. So that absorbed all the sort of news. And then you also that was sort of the peak of when the country figured out that the situation in the Gulf was much more serious than anybody anticipated, and that was absorbing a ton of news. So the pictures coming out of Nashville were pictures like this, and people didn't understand that, there was, Nashville is a big city, and there were quadrants of the city that were hurt, but huge portions of it that weren't, and we were recovering fast even then. We have a major event in the city in June, the Country Music Association's Music Fest, which is a huge, huge event. And so we had to get the word out that we're open for business and that we're going to go ahead and have all our events. And the Hall of Fame was one of the great ones who stepped up and got opened in about a week. That's a residential neighborhood. There's obviously the home of a police officer whose car was no longer available. A home, we had a couple fires as a result of this. I'll talk about this in a second. Well, what we suffered in this flood is this. This private property damage in Nashville was $2 billion, which is an incredible number. And the damage to public property was in the 100 millions. So it was an extensive flood, and the loss of life was 11 of our citizens died. But the city has, if I think back to the flood, And we do, because it's the recovery is a, we're moving faster probably than most places ever do, but it's a long-term thing. You don't get it done in a year. The story of the flood is the people in Nashville, and this picture illustrates that to me better than anything. One of the things I did, and others did, when the water crested on Monday afternoon, it was to go into all these neighborhoods. It was north, south, east, and west. It was all sorts of economic levels in terms of the neighborhood, and just walk through the neighborhood and see the damage. But one of the things I noticed immediately was this. You would go into any neighborhood, and you would see basically this. You would see the houses were demucked, that people had been trained to go into those houses and get the mud and the filth, because all that stuff comes into your home with the water out of the houses. They were trained to know how to cut the drywall out of the house so that it wouldn't, up to what level, so that you could protect the house's structure. And that was done, and all the rotten drywall was brought out and put in front of the house in relatively neat piles like that. All the rotten carpet was cut out and put in relatively neat piles like that. All the rotten and destroyed possessions of people's lives were put outside in relatively neat piles, waiting for our public works department to come and get them and to move them away. So when you're seeing this and you're walking down streets all over the city seeing these piles, you stop and you think, who did this? This is Wednesday after a flood that occurred, that the river crested on Monday. Who did this? Well, I can tell you, it wasn't the federal government, and it wasn't the state government, and it wasn't the local government. It was the people in Nashville. We had 20,000 volunteers helping each other and helping the city get back on its feet. And so we had an organization called Hands On Nashville, which the city had an MOU with, where that in a time of crisis, they would be the organizational people to bring in the volunteers to get the work done. And they got them out there, they delivered them where they needed to be, and they trained them on what they had to do, and they did it. Nashville is a great city of a very strong faith community. We had churches helping their parishioners. We had churches helping people who never set foot in their church. We had neighbors helping neighbors. We had strangers helping strangers. And that's the story to me of why the city moved forward, because people just did it. And they did it in a thoughtful way. And it was good that we had these pre-existing arrangements and agreements with universities and with volunteer organizations. But the fact is, the folks just showed up and they got it done. This is one of our parks underwater. This is one of our greenways. This is a great bridge, a greenway, and a creek runs underneath it. Usually the creek is substantially below the bridge, but during the height of the flood, the water ran as high as the top of the bridge and was going with such force that it just flipped the bridge. All of the deaths that occurred in Nashville occurred by the creeks and the tributaries of the Cumberland. Nobody died because of the Cumberland overflowing. It was all because of the flash flooding. And this is indicative of the power of the flash flooding. This is another great shot to me. This is a picture of the volunteers. This is a shot of, they're over by an area called Metro Center, which is a big office complex area development by the Cumberland. There's a levee. And as we got into Sunday and into Monday, we were worried that levee might not hold or it might get breached. And so we evacuated it, which has all sorts of ramifications for people who've got things in their building they need to attend to constantly. But we just closed it down. And then we called on Monday, we said we need to get volunteers out there to start sandbagging certain areas to make sure the river doesn't come in. So Hands On Nashville asked for volunteers at like 11 o'clock. By 1 o'clock, we got between 250 and 300 volunteers. And on Monday, it was really steamy. It was like after the storm, it was steamy out there just carrying these sandbags. And these sandbags are like 50 pounds. And what we had also, I'm a former public defender, so this is I like this part of the story. We have, like any city, we have jails. And in our jails, we had some folks who said, we want to help. And so they helped. They did sandbagging. They made sandbags for days. And then those were transported to a place like this to get the work done. And one of my happy memories of all this was when it was over, I said thank you to a lot of people who helped the city. I went out to the jail and met with the inmates who could not have been more proud of just having been able to be part of it. It was truly an interesting moment. The levee held, but that's an example of what volunteers can do. Now we have another sandbagging story. We have 2 water treatment plants in Nashville. When one of them, the K.R. Harrington plant, which is interesting in public how information gets out, nobody in Nashville, except unless you were into the water department, nobody in Nashville knew the K.R. Harrington plant unless you worked for the city. The K.R. Harrington plant flooded and was submerged quickly during the flood. It was wiped out. It went down. Then we had one, and so our water treatment, basically ability to produce drinking water, was cut in half. Then we had one other one, these are obviously on the river, which that's the source of our river, Old Mahundra, which was an historic, beautiful building built in the 19th century, wonderful building, but it was threatened. And so we were sending people, water department, public works people, inmates to do the sandbagging there, and we kept that water treatment plant going. But our water reserves fell down to 30% of what we normally use. So we went on TV and basically said, look, we got a problem here. We've got 30% of the water the reserves that we need. We can't produce but half the water we were producing before. So everybody needs to stop using water at the same level you've been using it. I asked the citizens to cut back their water usage to 50% of what they were using before the flood. And so I thought that was hopefully clear enough. I mean, because you're getting all these questions. Can we take a shower? How long should my shower be? Can we flush the toilet? I mean, I don't want to answer these questions. I don't know the answer to those questions. Just use 50% of what you're going to use before. So it was a massive public, PR thing in terms of us doing public announcements. This is the head of our water department, Scott Potter, who, again, he's a great guy, good friend, does a wonderful job, very progressive, a great environmentalist. He's an Annapolis graduate, a military guy, clean cut, handsome. Type of guy, if he came home and was dating your daughter, you'd be happy about that. So Scott's like leading this effort, telling everybody to stop using water, and we're doing daily press conferences where we're talking about the federal help, we're getting the state help, we're getting what's going on in different parts of the city, giving information. So we're constantly going on TV, and we're telling people not to use water, and so we're going through these personal dilemmas. Well, should I shave? Should I, what should I do? And we all answered that question in different ways. Scott answered it this way. This is how we look at the end of the crisis. Now, if he came to your home, you would probably get a restraining order. I mean, it was, but we got through it. And again, here's the volunteer spirit, the people doing the work that needed to be done to keep our city going. All right, so that leads us really to the open space plan, and it'll be clear why I started with the flood. The idea of having an open space plan is the benefits are that it brings positive economic benefits in addition to the aesthetic and environmental benefits that we see. And through the flood, we certainly probably have a greater appreciation than most cities about what can happen when you have poor planning. We have done a lot. Before the flood, we instituted a stormwater program, which we hadn't had in the city before. I mean, during the recession, I can talk about it here because no one's from Nashville. I'm running for re-election, so I want people to remember this. We increased the water rates, and we imposed a stormwater fee. And it was not controversial. People got it that we needed to do that. We needed to protect the infrastructure of our water. And the way I would sell it then, because the Cumberland River, is our friend, and the Cumberland River is an incredible part of Nashville's assets, is, all around Davidson County, you have counties that don't have the Cumberland River. And for Nashville, unlike other cities in the southeast, a lack of water or a lack of access to water will never be a hindrance to our growth and development. I mean, we have the water we need to grow and to be economically vital. And so we could talk about the need to make sure that our infrastructure was maintained. When I came into office, there was no bonding capacity in our water department, and we had to change that. We didn't have a stormwater program, and we had to change that because we had neighborhoods that would flood, we had basements that would flood, streets that flood, and we needed to begin to invest in that. But what became apparent during the flood is this. We also had homes that were built in the floodway. I mean, we had homes in the floodplain, but we had homes in the floodway. And the floodway is basically the area where you can see the moving water, the running water. And so immediately after the flood, we're trying to recover as fast as we can, and we're pushing the envelope in terms of getting the FEMA and TEMA, the Tennessee groups, to start doing our buyout programs. And so we began our hazardous mitigation home buyout program, which is a program to move people and structures out of the floodway to ensure that the level of damage suffered just now never happens again. And we identified 300 eligible homes that were of high concern right now because of their location and because of the amount of damage they received during the flood. Most of these homes were damaged in excess of 50% of their assessed value. And so we offered 305 homeowners to buy their homes so we could tear them down. And the way that gets paid for is, and we were doing this before the flood. I mean, it was going slowly, but we were buying out homes for safety reasons. But after the flood, we did 305. Basically, the federal government through FEMA pays 75%. TEMA, the state, pays 12.5%, and the city pays 12.5%. And so of that 305, 249 have agreed. We're in the process of doing the closing right now on about 70. And FEMA has been, I should say this, I'm in a federal building. People always ask me about the federal government and the flood. They couldn't have been better. I mean, FEMA was in Nashville before we were declared a disaster area. They came down there with a lot of people, and they literally were writing checks before the river crested. And they didn't leave until the work was done. So I should say to all you as taxpayers and to the federal government, since we're in this wonderful building, thank you. But FEMA did an outstanding job, if anybody asks about that. So the properties that we are acquiring and that we will acquire, and we'll do more as money becomes available. I mean, we have to wait basically on the federal government to free up funds for us to do this. These programs require that this space be cleared and remain open space forever. By law, the metropolitan government can use the property to create public parks or wildlife refuges, but we cannot sell the property to private individuals or develop it. So as a result of the flood, there is going to be along the river a substantial growth of open space. And moving people and structures out of the way of the floodwaters is just part of the story. We also need to make sure that we are minimizing the amount of stormwater runoff that goes into our creeks and streams. And we are addressing both of those issues through a new volume or new chapters in our stormwater regulation. And this is intended to provide developers with incentives for installation of low-impact measures to maximize stormwater absorption through green infrastructure like pervious pavement and natural plantings. This ordinance calling for these new stormwater regulations also calls for a review of Metro's regulations regarding floodplain management. All right. Another reason, there's a lot of other reasons, not just the flood, to do open space plan. When I came into office, it was mentioned in the introduction, I established a goal for the city to be the greenest city in the Southeast. And I know there's other people from the Southeast here, and we can go out in the parking lot and rumble after the talk. But that's my attitude about this is the biggest thing I'm obsessed with as mayor is education. That is the thing we got to get right as a city. And one of the things our governor did, our last governor, Governor Bredesen, did that I think is a good example of what I'm trying to do here with the environment, is Tennessee had for years measured our students below the national average. The sad part is we were having a hard time meeting that standard. But we were measuring our students below the national average of national standards, below it. And so the governor said, we can't do that. we're competing in a national and international economy. We got to measure our students at or above the national standards. You got to set your goals high. And if you got children, you know that if you tell your kids, I want you to perform this well, they'll probably perform that well and maybe a couple of millimeters above it. That's about it. They're smart. They figure it out. And they do what your expectations are. If you set your expectations high, they'll try to meet them, and a lot of them will meet them. So when we're looking at the environment, in the Southeast is, environmentally, it's a tough area. We've got, we're coal power. We've got a lot of automobiles. We got lots of things to deal with. It's a challenge, and we love challenges, so we're all happy with that. But you've got to set your expectations high. So when I said we're going to be the greenest city in the Southeast, some folks said, he's off his rocker. Other folks said, good, that's great, let's go. And there was this pent-up energy to get it done. And I'm not, when I decide to declare success, I will. But no, it is something to work on every day and to take seriously because we can do it. And I think it's good to have sort of this friendly competition amongst cities to want to attain something as positive as that. So as part of that, we had a series of recommendations, and one of them was to have an open space plan. And so we set up this partnership, as I mentioned, with the government, the private sector, to go ahead and do an open space plan. And after a national search and interview process, we hired a consulting team led by the Conservation Fund. The planning process we did essentially involved looking at all of our natural and cultural resources. We held public forums throughout the city to gather input about what people wanted to see in an open space plan. And out of that process, with the guidance of the Community Advisory Board, we developed a vision for conserving and enhancing Nashville's land and natural resources. And this slide here indicates, it's hard. Nashville is a unique city in that we have a consolidated form of government. In 1963, our city and county merged into one government to form the metropolitan government of Nashville and Davidson County. So I am the mayor of Metro Nashville, and I'm the mayor of an area that is 503 square miles. There's a lot of advantages that come from that. We don't duplicate services. You have one school district, you have one water department, one sheriff, one police department, and it's more efficient, and it's more efficient in terms of economic development. But it's a big area, and so we have a county that contains intense, real urban area. Downtown Nashville is a big city. We have suburban areas, and we even have rural areas in Nashville. And then we have large parts of the county which are hilly and rocky and not developable, that are just sort of open space and are still existing as undeveloped land. And you can see from this forest map just how much we actually have. This map shows essentially that we're trying to develop this open space plan around anchors of our current public parks. And the orange ovals represent our current public parks. And the idea is to create a network or a connection between all the large parks and preserved lands as we have a strategy for developing and preserving our open space. This connection also is very important for what we're trying to do. This represents the different waterways or water in Nashville. And you can see in the middle of it, that's the Cumberland and how prominent the Cumberland River is for the city. And you can also see all the different, that's going back to the flood conversation, all the different tributaries and creeks and how they're all over the city. And that was really a vital issue during the course of the flood. You can also see the Cumberland is like a snake, and it goes through the city and it creates bends. And the bends in the river do represent some of the greenest and most beautiful parts of our city. It's also some of the richest agricultural land. There are sod farms and other things like that along some of these bends. And then here's a connection, putting them all together. You get the parks with the rivers together and the creeks together to create an area that we want to try to preserve open space. A critical area for us in open space right now and green space is our downtown. We have not historically been real thoughtful about how we preserve it. The river goes through it, and so we're doing a lot right now. We've got about $30 million we're putting into the river downtown to make it more accessible, to make the river the center of downtown, which means more parks and green space around it. But we still have a lot of work to go in terms of that. Here are the priorities and themes that were identified by the plan. To connect wildlife and water networks, support urban and rural farming, connect the green infrastructure network, and preserving historic and iconic resources. The wildlife and water networks, and this picture is a picture of a new part of our park system. It's the H.G. Hill Old Forest. But it should be clear by now that it's important to create connections between the parks and also to make sure that we do well by our streams. The Cumberland River itself has had 20 years of progress in getting cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. It is, the wildlife is returning to the river. If you get a chance to go up the river away from downtown, you can see herons, you see eagles. It's coming back. And the creeks, for the most part, are getting cleaner too, but we still have a lot of work to do there. 14% of our streams are listed as impaired by the EPA, and so working on that is a major goal. One of the creeks that's impaired is the Mill Creek, which is home to an endangered species, the Nashville crayfish. And so, again, that's another reason to work hard on this. Urban and rural farming, we have, Nashville is positioned, I think, to be a leader in urban farming just because of the size of our city and the variety of land we have, and plus the agricultural history that surrounds Nashville and found throughout Tennessee. And it's important to me as a city to really work on the issues regarding healthy eating and healthy living. It's again, in the South, that is a major challenge. If you look at Tennessee as a state, and Nashville's part of it, is we're ranked 49th in terms, and the bad ranking for childhood obesity. I mean, it is a crisis, and so. I'll talk more about that, but there are benefits that come for that. Connecting people, it creates, open space creates networks and ability to bring people together. We have a great park system, a long history of having great parks in Nashville. We have invested for 15 years or more in our greenways, where the city is being connected by greenways. They're incredibly popular. I mean, when I talk to citizens, there's a lot of things that I hear that are constantly positive, and greenways are constantly positive. Everybody loves them. And so part of this plan will be a very aggressive plan to continue to expand our parks and greenways. I'm proud to say that since I've been mayor, we've added 558 acres to our park. That's a good start to our park system. That's a good start, but we need to keep doing it. We put $3.5 million in the most recent capital budget to fund greenway projects. And most significantly for what we're talking about today, we put $5 million, the first time in history for Nashville to do this, $5 million in our capital budget for acquisition of open space for the open space plan. So we're serious about it. It's not just a plan that's going to sit on a shelf. We've actually got $5 million in our hands right now to go ahead and implement it. But let me talk a little bit about the issue of health. There are a lot of reasons for doing open space. I mean, one is economic. We can spend a lot of time talking about tourism. Tourism is the number 2 private employer in Nashville. People come to Nashville to see iconic things such as the Hermitage, where Andrew Jackson lived. They come to see our museums. They come to see the Country Music Hall of Fame. They come to hear our symphony. They come for our universities. And the bottom line is they all come really to go to the honky-tonks on Lower Broadway. But they come for music, and Nashville represents something. It's an image. It's a place that is known for its culture and for its people. And you want to preserve that. And you want to be a place where people want to come to. And having open space and green space is part of that. So economically, it makes sense. It also is part of what makes a city unique. All mayors spend a lot of time, in particular, and I do, and I think it's the right thing to do, is ultimately what makes a city great is not buildings. Like every other mayor, I get excited when we build something. But the bottom line is what makes Nashville great and what's going to make Nashville an even better place to live is the people. So if you go back to my number one priority, it's education. You've got to make sure that our kids are getting the education they need to be competitive in this world, and they're getting the education so they can succeed. At the same time, we want to be attracting to Nashville. Nashville's a growing city. Our population is going up. I think it's a rising city. We want to attract to our city creative people. You know, there's a whole school of thought built around Richard Florida as a creative class, that cities that are going to thrive in this century are going to be the cities that attract people who are educated, who are educated but actually even smart beyond that, and are creative. And Nashville has some assets in that regard. You know, obviously you stop and you think of the universities we have. I mean, Vanderbilt's the most famous, but you have Fisk, you have TSU, you have Lipscomb, you have Belmont. You know, we have about 18 of them. And then outside of Nashville, Middle Tennessee, it is a heavy area of intense economic development around universities. So we have that. We have the healthcare industry, which, you know, we don't talk enough about, but the healthcare industry is this incredible story of entrepreneurial success. It all started in Nashville with Health Corporation of America, HCA. And from HCA, and it's really an amazing thing to see, is the healthcare family tree. All these companies, it's sort of like looking at Silicon Valley. All these companies came from it. You know, executives left and started their own companies. So we now have somewhere between 250 and 300 healthcare companies in Middle Tennessee. And it is the number one employer. It is the biggest economic generator. But you don't think of that, but these healthcare folks are entrepreneurs, and they are creating businesses. The other group that you would obviously associate with Nashville for being creative is the music industry. You know, Richard Florida just did a study, he's in Atlantic magazine, about the music industry, and if you look at North America, Nashville we beat everybody, everybody, in terms of infrastructure for music, in terms of the people who live there and work in music and produce and create in music. Our biggest asset are songwriters. I mean, people who come to Nashville, and they come from all, you know, I'm a lawyer, I've run government, a big law firm, big law offices, and I have always had a few people on staff who, you know, on the weekends are in some club singing and hoping that they're going to publish a song. But these are folks who come to Nashville, and their talent is their ability to create. Their ability to write a song, their ability to play a song, their ability to perform a song, or their ability to do the technology that's now related to producing a song. And that's a great thing to have. So we need to continue to attract those people, and it's always going to be something you got to pay attention to. And so I think those people who are creative, those people who are smart, those people who want to be someplace where there's a buzz, where there's excitement, want to be someplace where there's clean air, where there's great greenways, where there's parks, where you can walk, where it's healthy. And so that's why you do open space plans. You do it because you want to create. You don't do it, you know, it's like people always ask me questions like, well, why are you building this? Why are you doing it? Well, I'm for schools, I'm for public. You do it because you want to create a vital city. You want to create a city that functions. And that's why you do it. And so it all fits into that. And then the last thing that I just will close with and I want to talk about is this whole idea of health. Our city, you know, we have all these assets. But when you look at being ranked 49th on childhood obesity, it's not good, and it's serious, because childhood obesity is an indicator for diabetes. It's an indicator that that child will probably have a life expectancy or a lifespan less than their parents, less than a lifespan they should have. Right? So fundamentally, you want a city that's vital, that is healthy. And to be healthy, you've got to change the culture a little bit. You know, we're the only city in Tennessee to receive a grant from the federal government, I think it's about $7.5 million, to work on healthy eating and healthy living, to encourage our citizens to exercise more and to eat better. So that means working on things like food deserts. That means encouraging people not to eat fast food, but to eat healthy food, and encouraging people to get more exercise. And we are going to begin an endeavor in March and in April where, you know, we've already been doing public walks and encourage people to get outside, but we're going to start a massive effort to get people in Nashville to exercise more. You know, we're going to have a challenge to walk 100 miles with the mayor, not at once, over a period of time, and then to eat better. You know, and people, different people, you're not going to change it overnight. But to me, this is like, you know, you talk about being the greenest city. We're 49th. We have got to be able to move the dial on this. I think we clearly can. This is something in terms of getting people to exercise and to change their eating habits, to moderate their eating habits, not to become a different person. You can do that. And if you do that and you move Nashville down or you move Tennessee down from 49th to 40, those are real lives. Those are real kids who are going to get to live longer. Those are real kids who are going to have a productive life and be happy. So that's worth doing. And if it kicks off and it really works and we move down into the mid-20s, you know, I'd be prouder of that than being number one in almost anything else I can think of. So that's why you do open space stuff. You don't do it because, you know, you have a mayor who says he wants to be the greenest city in the Southeast. You don't do it because you go to a conference and people say everybody's doing open space plans. You do it because it helps your city's economy. You do it because it makes your city a more attractive place for people to come to who you want to live in your city. And you do it because it makes your city healthier and it makes your kids healthier and it makes them live longer. And that's why you do it. And those are good reasons, as good as any reasons, for government to do anything. So thank you for having me. Enjoyed it.
I think we need more leaders like you, Mayor Dean. That's excellent. You've really shown us all the reasons to do open space planning. Do you have time for one or two questions, or how's your time?
One or two easy ones.
Easy ones. All right.
Hello. Thanks very much. Kathy Buckley from the Boston Metropolitan Planning Organization. I was wondering if the flood last year had an effect on how people, if there was a connection made to climate change, and if that had an effect on how people felt about that issue.
You know, certainly in Nashville, we are much more sensitive, like I was to these emails I was getting about 2 to 3 inches of rain, than we ever were before. And we probably pay attention to weather events, whether they're in California or Australia, that are happening and just kind of wonder about them. You know, maybe we think there are more floods because we're watching floods more. Nashville has also had this winter more snow than we've had in 20 years. I mean, our schools are right now going through a process of determining how they're going to make it. We allotted for 5 snow days and they had 9. They got to make up those 4 days. And so they're trying to figure out whether you add 30 minutes to the end of the day or take away from spring break. And I was just telling folks that I've been through this process where I've tried to have the mayor be more involved in public schools, and because there's a separation. And this one I'm happy to let them handle. It's a tough issue. But I think people in Nashville think there's something going on with the weather. But no one is necessarily automatically saying this is tied into global warming. And you know, actually, my cab driver yesterday going from to Raleigh to the airport was talking about the snow there, and he was making a pretty compelling argument that get used to the snow. You need to get more salt in your city, mayor, and all this, because that's attached to global warming, and that's counterintuitive because, you know, people will say, well, you talk about global warming, you got more snow than we've ever had, but that connection is not clear. No, I would say it's a general matter, not clear.
Hi, I'm Ruth McWilliams from the Adirondacks of northern New York, where we get lots of snow and love it. But this week we've been hearing a number of presentations where the land-water connection is really coming through, and a number of the presenters have related their open space greenway plans to rivers. Right. But I think part of the evolution of the conversation that I'm anxious about is how we actually look at the rivers themselves as well as opportunities. And I've gotten involved recently in blueway efforts like Greenway. But the blueway is really focusing more on outdoor recreation on the river. And it just seems to me in places like yours, where you've got a river with 9 bends within your jurisdiction, huge opportunities. So is the river itself being viewed as an opportunity for the recreation and the economic activity for your place?
Yes. I mean, I think one of the things that went on in urban America in the last 25 years or so, and Nashville actually is behind a little bit, is most cities recognize that when you have a river or you have a body of water in your city, that's an incredible asset. It's an incredible asset not just for the water, but it's an incredible asset for a way to organize your city and to create recreational activities and sort of center your city. And Nashville actually turned its back on the river. I mean, the downtown buildings on First Avenue, I showed you that photograph, those are the backs of the buildings. The front of the buildings are facing away from the river. And so we're reversing that. We're putting money in to put parks and actually active parks along the river downtown. We are working hard to preserve and create green spaces and parks along the river. But in terms of recreation, there's an effort to do rowing on the river. There's efforts to, obviously to do fishing, and there's boating on the river. The Cumberland River, though, is a working river. I mean, there are big barges that go down that river every day. And the Cumberland connects ultimately to Ohio and Mississippi. It is a river which still moves products, and it's kind of exciting to see a working river go through your city, because as the economy goes with it. So there will be more recreation on the river, and the river's got a current in it too. I mean, you don't want people just necessarily, you can swim in it, but it's got a current. We have 2 lakes, Percy Priest and Old Hickory, that are Army Corps of Engineer lakes created by damming rivers that are major recreation sites for our city. But you're right that the growth potential in Nashville is fantastic for the river.
All right. Do you have time for one more?
Sure.
Or all right, this will be the.
Thank you. My name's Jim Keeney. I'm an ecologist out of Seattle, and I do a lot of work with FEMA floodplain planning and green infrastructure up in the Pacific Northwest. And the saying up there is, there's nothing like poor planning and a flood to then focus your attention for good planning. So I'm curious if some of your neighboring jurisdictions are getting as lightened as your city is, and what kind of opportunity is there for your staff and for you to mentor them in this program?
Well, the rivers are I'm a big advocate for regionalism, which is something we hadn't pursued aggressively in Nashville before. And frankly, I think Mayor Hickenlooper in Denver stole the idea from Mayor Daley in Chicago, and I went to Denver and got the idea, and I stole it, which is I learned about Mayor Hickenlooper had created this mayor's caucus where he invited all the surrounding counties and cities and mayors to come and meet periodically to discuss issues that are important to them. So after I went to Denver, I did the same thing in Nashville. And the issues that we talk about and had been talking about the most are transportation related, mass transit solutions for the region. But the river is an obvious regional issue. I mean, what we do in Nashville is going to have an effect downstream, and it's a classic thing, and what's happening upstream from us is affecting us. And how we manage the river, we have to do it together. And the Corps of Engineers, as anybody who has a river knows, pretty darn powerful group. And you can't do a whole lot without their permission, and they're the ones who're supposed to be leading this. And we have a good relationship with them, but one of the things that frustrates me is local government just moves faster than the federal government. I mean, we can and we have to, because for me, I can't sit back and say, well, we'll do the long-range plan, we'll get to that in 2 or 3 years. The voters are like, well, we just had this big flood, Mayor. Did you miss that? It was in all the newspapers. And so we're actually moving forward to do our flood prevention work in terms of we got to increase the size of the levees, we got to create water storage, we got to do water diversion, and the Corps is there saying we'll be with you. We got to get through this budget. We got to see where we're going to be in a year from now, but we'll be with you. And then whatever we come up with is going to cost millions and millions of dollars, and we're obviously going to be looking to the Corps for help. And all the surrounding cities and counties will be looking to the Corps to make sure that they're protected too. But the Mayor's Caucus, we are forming groups to actually specifically look at this question. How do we work with the Cumberland, keep it clean, keep it safe, stop flooding together? Because if we build bigger levees in Nashville, the water's going somewhere. And so everybody's got an interest in cooperating there, and that'll be a good thing to strengthen the region.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Mayor. You are a great keynote.